This is a game of obstruction, and whichever piece makes it all the way to the opposing base wins the game. All games are played on a rectangular playing field, out of which no play can occur. The length of the rectangle is 1.5 times its width. At either width end are the bases, white on the right and black on the left, each placed in the middle of the width segments. In front of each base is a boundary line, beyond which no play can occur. Each base has on it a piece of related color. These pieces are what are pushed to the opponent's base to win. To begin the game, both colors of black and white are given 4 setting points, each of which are to be placed in the playing area. Each color gets to choose exactly how they place the setting points. There are tons of ways to do this, but one method is for white to place the first point, followed by black, white, and so on, alternating until all points are set. Then, connections are made from the setting points to their bases. Finally, setting points of opposing color are connected to each other by connecting the highest white with the highest black, second highest white with the second highest black, and so on until all points are linked together. Now the bases are connected to one another. White goes first, moving its piece 1 space and stopping on either a setting point or an intersection point. Then white creates an obstruction, which is intended to slow black down by creating more intersection points. Now there are 2 kinds of obstructions: line segment obstructions and face obstructions. Face obstructions can only be created within enclosed regions of the playing field, created by closed loops of lines, also called edge loops. If one is created, all segments part of the loop become restricted, meaning no piece of any color that includes the color that made the obstruction can travel along any edge of the loop enclosing the restricted face. Segments can be unlocked, but whoever unlocks an edge cannot move their piece for that turn. And the color that created the face can move on the same turn that it created the face, but on the next turn cannot produce an obstruction of any kind, although it will be able to move. Also, pieces cannot get within 1 space of each other. There are many more rules which I'll cover later. For now, let's see an example game. White makes its move, avoiding the center of the X because it takes 2 moves instead of 1 to get to white's current position. White's obstruction idea was to create this intersection point that, should white move to it, would control these points from black. The problem is that it just blocks white and doesn't stop black from taking the side route. Black chooses to make an obstruction behind the piece, which is generally optimal since the big idea is to block the opponent, not yourself like white just did. White moves to the X it created, which indeed turned out to only block white. White blocks black with a line segment obstruction. Black gets 1 step closer to the white base. Now white cannot block black anymore with line obstructions because there are no more control points. Black blocks white again, which demonstrates why the side of the field is generally better for being obstructed less. White moves on, creating a face obstruction as an only means of obstructing black. Black unlocks an edge. White moves. Black moves, now only 1 space away from the base. Yet another line obstruction is made. White can only try to get closer. At this point, victory for black is inevitable. Yet white can still create a face. Black unblocks. White cannot create an obstruction, so black wins the game. There are also games that can be played on this same setup, where white wins. Take for example this game where white restricts black from traveling along either side, potentially forcing black to travel along the middle, where it can be obstructed most. Black could have liberated an edge, but would have had to liberate another, giving white plenty of time to progress to the base and obstruct black even more. So white could exploit the route on the edge, leaving black with limited obstruction opportunity. Eventually, both pieces were 1 space away from base. But white had the tempo to restrict black. who could not liberate an edge as that would give white time to make it. So black was forced to move back and restrict white, but white just liberated the edge and black was too slow. On the first move, white has 537 options, and after each of those, black has hundreds more. The number of possible moves quickly becomes unfathomably large, as each move opens the door to many more. Most of the moves, if not all, however, are useless, as this position may be a forced win for either side. But all that comes from just one setup. Differentiation between setups are not determined by the locations of the setting points. Instead, they're classified by how many overlaps or intersections there are. Even with a simpler version of the game featuring just 4 total setting points, there are for sure more than 75 possible setups, although there could be hundreds. This version with 8 setting points certainly has many more. But if each setup is a forced win, variety can be added to the game so that it is harder to solve. Now there are more rules to take into account. If a face is created and then another face right next to it is also created, the edge they share is double locked, meaning it would take 2 separate turns to unlock the edge. If the shared edge is unlocked before the face sharing that edge is created, it is only locked once. Pieces can only re-enter their own base 2 times. A piece cannot camp its base while the other piece is within 1 space of the base. If a piece is 2 spaces away from opposite base, and then the other piece camps its base, the piece can legally get within 1 space of opposite base, after which the camper is forced to leave its base. And if it cannot do so, the camper loses. After setup, creating an edge obstruction that connects to one or both bases is not allowed. There might be a need to add or change the rules, such as making it illegal to travel along any side edges. One idea for adding complexity to make the game have less obvious forced wins is the following. After a setup game is finished with a winner, 2 more games can be played by switching the sides and perhaps allowing each side to create another setting point. Best 2 out of 3 wins overall. With all these rules in mind, let us observe a full course game. Keep in mind that this game is not played perfectly. Mistakes by both colors are for educational purposes. The game begins with white placing the first setting point. Black responds with a setting point placed such that the line connecting it to the base crosses the white setting point line. Black did this to complexify the setup, obstructing white and avoiding the simplest setup, which white will win more easily because white goes first and has a tempo advantage. White puts a point that does not cross any other line, because while black tries to complexify, white tries to keep intersections as simple as possible, meaning the fewer intersections, the better for white, because fewer intersections means fewer obstructions. Black creates another point that also keeps the setup simpler. Black wants to keep at least 1 edge more free, so that white travels through the more obstructed regions while black has the easier way reserved. White continues with the simplification approach. Black intercepts 2 of white's edges, contributing to complexification. White keeps trying to keep the setup position simple. Black could have intercepted 2 of white's edges with the last setting point, but instead decided to make the setup symmetrical, which could have lost black the game since white tends to dominate in symmetrical positions. Setting point placement arguably could be the most important phase of the game. Side edges are all restricted. The playing phase begins. White starts by moving its piece toward the black base and uses a bizarre strategy where a player obstructs their own piece with the idea of allowing the other player to win the first game so that the second game is almost certainly a win for the self-obstructing player. Black moves its piece closer to the white base and obstructs white further. White camps its base with the idea of allowing and waiting for black to arrive and win the first game out of 3. Black plays along with white's strange idea. White shuffles passively and obstructs itself even more. Black gets within one space and connects the central setting points to have access to the black central setting point, should it be necessary. White passively unlocks an edge, giving black full access to the white base. Black wins the first game. The bases are swapped. Now is the time both colors can each create one more setting point. Since it was white's turn for the first game, it is black's turn for the second, so black creates a setting point in the center to avoid excessive messiness from white creating its setting point somewhere on the opposite side. By setting a point in the middle, black stops white from being able to create an opposite-sided setting point because there is no opposite from the middle, only from one side. Even so, this might not be best for black. White responds with a similar placement, trying to keep the points symmetrical. Black moves toward the opposite base and makes no effort to obstruct white, because white wins inevitably. White wins, the second game was quite short, as white's strategy seems to have worked, but only partly. As the third decisive game begins, white goes first again. White places a setting point in such a way that it blocks black with a line obstruction by creating an intersection point, as now it is black that is closer to white than white is close to black, which is the disadvantage of white's strange strategy. Black sets a point where it does not obstruct black. Now there are edges that are no longer on the very sides. Such edges can actually be freed by the creation of edges which become the sides. Although restrictions can be lifted in that manner, there will always be restricted sides. And when a line obstruction is created such that it goes through a created face, it bisects the face, meaning each new smaller face is considered a created face. Any edge part of the face before bisection that gets bisected becomes two smaller edges with the same status. So if an edge that was locked gets bisected by a line obstruction, the two smaller resulting edges will be locked as well. Or if the original edge was double locked, the shorter edges after bisection will each be double locked as well. The part of the line obstruction itself that is inside the bisected face gets locked. The third playing phase begins with white moving a step closer to the black base and obstructing black. Black also moves closer and obstructs white from traveling along a side, even though the side edges are obstructed. Traveling as much on the side as possible is advantageous because a piece on the side is obstructed least, while a piece on the very side is not obstructed at all, and that is why the side edges are restricted. White unlocks the edge. Black moves toward the side. White, instead of traveling along the edge it unlocked, decides to stay in the middle and create a line connecting directly to the point it wants to arrive at with the idea of using the line as a shortcut. However, the move was probably a mistake, because black can now obstruct white with more line obstructions, meaning the side route, although initially longer, was the shortcut. Black takes the opportunity to obstruct white and move even more to the side. White obstructs black and stops black from moving to this intersection. Now I made every line and piece skinnier to view intersections and small edge loops more clearly. Here black may have fumbled going back to the middle. Obstructing white with a face obstruction may have been okay, but black could have at least made that obstruction and then moved to the side. By passively shuffling, black made no more progress toward white's base with its piece. White unlocks, which was probably not the best move because going here and obstructing black could accomplish more. Black shuffles, white moves toward the side and makes a line connecting to a setting point. White wants to travel along the side, although moving here could have been better, as in this case, going through the middle and getting obstructed a bit may be better than wasting time moving to the sides. Remember, black would obstruct white, but so would white obstruct black. However, white has probably probably already lost. Black, instead of going here and continuing on the side, keeps shuffling and tries to pass through the middle. White commits to moving toward the setting points and obstructs black. Black moves closer and blocks white from making it to the setting points. White obstructs black and keeps trying to reach the point. Black keeps blocking white as its piece travels through a jungle of edges. White keeps moving toward the setting point and obstructs black. The white piece keeps getting blocked from the setting point. Both pieces keep moving and obstructing each other, but they are bogged down. The mistake they make is that they play too passively. White makes an edge to use it as a shortcut instead of obstructing black, and black does the same. White is finally getting close to the setting points, but black keeps obstructing and finally wises up by going toward the side. It has taken white far too long to get that close. Black keeps moving to the side while obstructing white via creating a face. Now, black could not have made this obstruction because each setting point is like an octagon. Edges can only connect to these 8 locations, and while there is no limit for the number of edges that can connect to a single location, there are only so many locations. White's unlocks, though its piece could have gone here and made this obstruction for a shorter cut. Black is now threatening to reach white's base within 4 moves, thanks to its position on the side, while white is way further from the black base. White gets tunnel vision and insists on reaching the setting point instead of taking this shorter route and obstructs black with a face, which is yet another mistake. Black unlocks this tiny edge. White finally makes it to the setting points but cannot create this line to free up the nearby edges because white made a face obstruction. Black gets within 3 spaces and brutally obstructs white with a face, kicking the white piece out as white has to move to obstruct black but can only move away from black's base. White falls back and frees the edges instead of blocking black, so black gets within 2 spaces. White moves forward and does all it can to obstruct black, but black simply unlocks. And then white is way too slow to make any meaningful progress as black gets within 1 space. Both colors unlock an edge before white obstructs black the best it can. Once again, black gets within 1 space and blocks white. White is completely lost. Again, white has to fall back to obstruct black one last time, but black simply unlocks once again, and after white moves, black wins the overall game. This is a game of obstruction, a game I think has great potential if it is developed properly. And who knows, this whole game might already be a thing. This is also the first video of a series I plan to make for further development of the game of Obstruction. There are still faults that can make the gameplay uneven, such as the tempo advantage problem. I will have a go at fixing these and adding new elements to make notation possible. For example, a grid can be used to provide a set of fixed locations to place setting points. But until that happens, take care, keep thinking, and farewell.